What's going on, guys? Andrew Newmark Gaming back here, and today we're going to be talking about some Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains episode 90. Now, this starts our duel between Bowman and Aoi, and one thing I want to point out about this duel from the get-go is that the agreement between the two participants is that if Aoi wins the duel, Bowman's going to be giving her a vaccine that would essentially allow her to free Miyu's consciousness data. This is interesting to me because one of the first premises we were introduced to about Mirror Link Vrains is that if a player loses a duel there, their data is essentially deleted from the system. Well, if that's going to be the case, Bowman being an Ignis, if he loses this duel, wouldn't theoretically exist anymore because he's nothing but data at this point. So if that's the case, it seems like there can be some exceptions made to this whole Mirror Link Vrains deleting you type of concept, because Bowman would still have to be around if Aoi loses the duel, hence his data not being deleted, in order for him to give this vaccine to her to free Miyu. Now, some could say that maybe Bowman's just lying about this whole thing and whatever, but so far, Bowman hasn't really been one to lie. He's been very clear-cut, very honest about things. He hasn't necessarily been always doing what we would say is good in the show, but he definitely hasn't necessarily been a liar so far. He hasn't struck me as the manipulative type, and I think that just kind of goes along with his personality pretty well. He doesn't strike me as the type who would manipulate something like that just to make the duel occur, especially considering he has the power to force Aoi to duel him based on what we've seen in this episode. I mean, he was literally able to send shockwaves through both regular Link Vrains and Mirror Link Vrains. So with that being the case, if he really needed her to duel, I don't think he would necessarily need to tempt her with something like this. He could literally just force her into place and lock her down. Now, the question that I kind of raise about that is, if Bowman's able to send these shockwaves through Mirror Link Vrains and everything else, why can't he just force his opponents outside of there? Is his power not quite as extensive as he makes it seem there, at which rate then it does lean a little bit more into the deception thing? Or is this just kind of typical Yu-Gi-Oh! Fashion that we need to do a temporary suspension of disbelief in order to basically allow ourselves to continue to enjoy the show? I'm probably going to go with the latter on this one, and that we kind of just have to roll with it, except that there might be a couple of plot points that sort of contradict each other here and there in order to keep enjoying the show, and for the most part, I'm okay with that. Just figured it was worth pointing out. So let's go ahead and jump into the duel itself, and we get some interesting character exchanges between Aoi and Bowman. And one of the first things I really want to point out about Bowman here is, in recent episodes, his brother Haru was essentially killed. I mean, given the fact that he is an AI and his data is deleted, there wouldn't really be anything left of him after he loses the duel, and he's going up against the very opponent that caused this deletion of his brother's data. Now, what's interesting to me about this is that Bowman very much acknowledges the fact that he is in some ways mourning the fact that Haru loses. He basically says to himself, "I'm not going to let your loss go to vain, brother." But at the same time, he's not showing any outward emotion or rage towards Aoi in particular. Now, part of me wonders if this is the objective and logical, clear thinking side to him. Part of me wonders if he maybe blames himself even a little bit for basically needing to allow Haru to go do this fight for him, for not doing a better job maybe stopping him from going to fight. I mean, he essentially was trying to stop Haru when Haru volunteered to go duel Aoi. So all of these are possible thoughts rattling around in Bowman's head, I think, because of that logical grounding that he's in, despite the fact that we are starting to see some more emotional sides come out of him. At the same time, we're also getting the fact that maybe there's a little bit more happening underneath the surface than is necessarily being revealed to us at this time, and that also hints to me, based on the fact that he tells Aoi in this episode, and Aqua in particular, how he's no longer a puppet of lightning, he has his own free will, that maybe if those emotions are starting to stir up a little bit more in Bowman, there may be the possibility of that at some point maybe he comes around, changes sides here, because I think that emotional core, that ability to connect to people and other things, is kind of what distinguishes Playmaker's side a little bit more at this point, because a lot of their whole thing is protecting both ends of the spectrum, right? Not wanting to see either side destroyed. So I think the more empathy Bowman's able to experience, even if it is just towards a sibling like Haru, the more likely it is that maybe he's going to come around to see the perspective of Playmaker's team, like Aoi and Aqua. And I think if anyone was going to do that, it would be Aqua. She's kind of known for being able to see the truth of people, and a lot of being able to tell when people are telling the truth and whatnot comes from the ability to empathize with them. So if that's the case, well, then this is kind of the perfect opportunity for it, because Bowman's dueling Aqua. This is Yu-Gi-Oh! One of the main ways characters connect is through duels, so this would be kind of her big opportunity to get through to him. Now, one of the other things that kind of comes up, and this isn't necessarily to do with either of our participants, is how much Akira typically blames himself for a lot of what happens to Aoi. We've seen multiple times throughout the show how much the weight of raising her falls onto his shoulders, and how much pressure he puts himself under to make sure he's doing a good job with that. Bearing all that in mind here, though, it seems to finally dawn upon him that, hey, Aoi's making her own choices. Everything that happens to her isn't necessarily my fault. I need to be here to support her no matter what her decisions are, but I also have to acknowledge the fact that this isn't my life to control, it's hers. And I think that's kind of finally dawning upon him as he sees the fact that she didn't enter Mirror Link Vrains because he worked at Soul Technology. She wasn't doing that because of him. She was doing that mostly because of everything that happened to Miu, at least basically from the episode where she connected with Aqua onward, and because she wanted to explore, because she wanted to develop and learn from a character like Emma. All of those were her independent choices, and I think it's really good character growth for Akira to finally see that. I think it's going to make, and that's going to bring us to our last bit of dialogue that really stood out to me in terms of the dual banter in this episode. And that's the fact that Aoi describes what lightning's done to the human world as a flat-out invasion. And while this wasn't necessarily a way I'd really looked at it before, I think it is a pretty accurate description. I mean, he more or less comes in unprompted and starts stealing people's consciousness data and starts setting up to essentially invade and either enslave or destroy the human world there, which is pretty darn aggressive. I mean, at times there are parts where I've been trying to at least kind of understand where lightning's coming from, but one thing that we have to really consider, especially from Aoi's perspective, is, hey, I just watched one of the closest friends I ever had have their consciousness data stolen by one of the Ignises that she was put through absolute torturings as a child in order to watch be created. And this is something that Flame even points out when they're dueling Windy alongside Soulburner. Then throwing on top of that the fact that Aoi fought alongside Playmaker and Go in order to protect Link Vrains, and in doing so protect against the Knights of Hanoi that would have destroyed the Ignises, and yet these Ignises are still hunting after humanity. I'd be extremely frustrated and aggravated too, and I kind of understand where she's coming from, and it makes me, at least now that I'm trying to take on Aoi's perspective more, even more frustrated with the way Lightning's pursuing things, and even more antagonizing of him. In the past, I've always tried to see his perspective at least a little bit from sort of a survival standpoint, but this makes it even more polarizing than it was before to see Lightning as an antagonist, and part of me's kind of okay with that because they've sort of been gradually building more and more towards that. I like the use of the word invasion here. I think it was some really stellar word choice, but enough of me geeking out about connotations and everything else. Let's go ahead and get into what actually happens within the duel here. Bowman actually ends up sacrificing an opportunity to basically OTK Aoi. He's got, he sets up these Hydrodrive monsters. He's able to attack her with them. He could theoretically deal 5,000 points of direct damage, but he instead opts to form a Link 3 Hydrodrive monster that can block effects, and even still manages to set himself up to theoretically OTK her. Thankfully, Aoi has a trap card that manages to protect her, but still, this shows how powerful Bowman's gotten, and that's one thing I've really liked about his characters. He has definitely gotten stronger every time he's appeared on screen, which is something that usually I think is only clearly distinct with the main protagonist, that we have a really clear-cut evolution in their dueling skills, versus with Bowman, I think his has actually been one of the best strength growth arcs throughout all of Yu-Gi-Oh! I mean, sure, he hasn't shown any new summoning methods or anything yet, but that wouldn't surprise me if it's somewhere on the horizon here. And every time he's dueled, he's gotten better and better. We saw him go from being outright annihilated by Playmaker to Playmaker pulling out a win at the last second, to him essentially being in a position where he could have won a duel against Playmaker, but he opted not to learn more about Playmaker's tactics. And it once more just shows how intimidating of an enemy Bowman really can be because of how analytical he is. And he even throws away an opportunity to beat Aoi here, to set up a better field for defense and everything else. That makes for a really strong opponent. Now this brings us to, in this very same turn, one of the coolest parts I think of this duel, and that's that Aoi summons Marincess Crystal Heart, which essentially is kind of like this reincarnated form of the Crystal Heart monster that Earth used so often. I think that's really cool to see like a Fallen Allies card kind of come back, and it's something that we've seen a good bit in Yu-Gi-Oh! For example, back in the Battle City arc, we saw Yugi using Red Eyes. I mean, even though Joey wasn't quite a Fallen Ally at that point yet, it was still a card that one of his friends had sort of used there. Then alongside that, you've also got various cards like Power Tool Dragon that evolved over time and everything else. Just when they're able to reintegrate these monsters in a plot relevant manner into Yu-Gi-Oh! I always think it's really cool, and this Crystal Heart card actually does a really good job protecting Aoi. It kind of shows Earth acting as the shield over them. Reminds me a little bit of the way Kite was kind of dueling alongside Yuma in his head when he was facing down with Shark for the last time in Zexal. I draw a lot of Zexal comparisons in this that kind of just struck me, but still, I thought that was a really cool use of the Crystal Heart card. And what's interesting about it is, yes, this is sort of kind of a reimagined form of it, but it's also still doing a very similar thing, in that it is protecting Aqua. She's dueling alongside Aoi, and it's unaffected by other monsters' effects when it's summoned by the effect of Marincess Snow, which is the way Aoi brings it out. This actually saves Aoi from the second attack, and the fact that It's able to block attacks by just discarding a Marincess from hand. Once more, it's protecting Aqua. I like the fact that they kept it consistent with what was going on, but also made it so it bent to fit Aui's thing. Now, the one downside to this card is I thought the way in which it was used was extremely situational, considering it essentially needed to be summoned via a very specific trap card in order for it to protect Aoi in which the way it did, which just makes it one of those, hey, I'm Yusei and I'm going to activate this exact 5-card combo where the cards are normally useless, but in my case, it's going to act as this miracle combo to save my life type of thing. And that sometimes irks me a little bit about the show, but I still think the ability to see Crystal Heart back again in this new form kind of overrode that frustration in my mind. Now, this is really cool because it also sets up Aoi to survive the duel and sets her up in kind of a similar tactic to what she used to use with Trick Stars, in that she's able to set up this wall that her opponents are able to basically find a lot of difficulty getting over via the new Marincess Crystal Heart card, and then tries to go for effect damage. Even Playmaker points out how similar this is to kind of her old strategies with Trick Stars, and she tries to take this approach to defeating Bowman. Bowman has Judgment Arrows set up. He has a really powerful monster that can block other water monsters' effects. So Aoi goes on the defensive, tries this effect damage route. Bowman unfortunately manages to block it, but Aoi doesn't seem any more discouraged. I thought it was a cool throwback to Trick Stars to see that effect damage attempt, and it makes me wonder if more in her Marincess deck we're going to see that. I think that would be a really good route for the show to explore, considering basically then the deck she's using would be a hybrid between what was hers in the Trickstar deck, and then what Aqua brings to the table in terms of being a water attribute deck. I think that could be really awesome to see. But once more, getting back to Aoi's determination here, she doesn't seem discouraged whatsoever. She seems more ready to go than ever by the end of this episode, and that's something that I think is really cool. Now, in terms of her winning the duel, I still don't really know where I fall on that. I think Bowman has way too much plot armor, but, you know, the next episode title is going to be called Proud Maiden. She's already surprised us a little bit with this Marincess Crystal Heart monster. We've seen Soulburner recently do XZ summoning, so I wouldn't say that's out of the picture for Aoi at all in terms of her doing that. She's usually shown a pretty similar evolution rate in terms of her dueling that Soulburner's shown. So I think there is possibly still a chance for her to win, even if it isn't in an unconventional means, especially considering Bowman does seem to be softening up a little bit in terms of having some more emotional reactions to things. And once more, I think that whole empathetic side of him, as it starts to awaken, plays a little bit more into Playmaker's side than it does into, say, Lightning's. So I think there is still a slim chance. I also think it's very possible we could see something similar to what happened with Joey versus Merrick way back in Battle City. I was about to say Duelist Kingdom, where Joey goes down but had the opportunity to win. Maybe Aoi set up to win, and then Bowman pulls some stupid shenanigans, manipulating Link Vrains the way we saw him do earlier in this episode to basically either end the duel or put Aoi in a position where she can't attack or something ridiculous like that. I think that's very possible as well, so we'll just have to wait and see. I think this is going to be a cool duel to watch, you know, unfold from here. I liked seeing Aoi's Marincess deck a lot more in action, and there's just going to be one more thing I want to really note about this episode, and that's a couple of the lines by Revolver here. The first one's going to be the fact that he doesn't really care the order in which the Ignises are destroyed. He just wants to make sure that they are all indeed destroyed. And this kind of reminds us of Revolver's overall goal, but I think it goes in tandem with another line we see here, which is when he's kind of commenting on Aoi, right around the time that Akira's making the revelation about why Aoi's doing what she's doing. We also see Playmaker's thoughts and Revolver's thoughts, and Revolver's thoughts are more or less, he's watching another person who becomes a victim of the actions of the Lost incident, and they were negatively affected by it, and now they're watching it essentially puppeteer their life from there on moving forward. And that, to me, kind of strikes me as Revolver showing further remorse. Once more, he's not really the type of character to outwardly express this in a very direct sense, but it strikes me as it's kind of resonating with him of, this was not something right that my father did. Now, this could go one of two routes. Perhaps it's going to go that he's able to sympathize more with these characters that were victims of the Lost incident. Maybe he's going to work with them more. Maybe he is growing towards trying to understand these Ignises that are working alongside humans, because these Ignises do seem to be, at least in some ways, helping the people that aided in creating them. For instance, I and Playmaker seem to be getting along pretty well, even if Playmaker doesn't like revealing that to I a lot. Now, moving on to the other side of that, perhaps this is kind of reinvigorating Revolver's determination to destroy the Ignises because he sees how much pain the Lost incident caused to a lot of people. Either way, I think it was a neat little bit of dialogue that we got from here. Now, the other interesting thing that kind of shows up at the end of this episode is we see Akira and Ghost Girl watching from a whole new terminal and seeming extremely concerned in the episode preview that we have for the next episode. Now, Yu-Gi-Oh! Shows us these concerned types of looks from spectators players in duels all the time, so I wouldn't necessarily say this writes Aoi off as necessarily having a loss, but I do think it is something worth noting here. We also get the fact that Aoi's just seeming more and more determined. She even shows some expressed concerns, but once more, the episode previews at the end of episodes here misdirect us all the time, so we'll just have to wait and see. It's gonna about wrap up my thoughts on this episode, guys. I thought it was pretty good on the whole. I'm excited to see how this duel ends up concluding. As per your usual, be sure to let me know your thoughts, theories, etc. in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If not, constructive criticism is always welcome, and I'll catch you guys next time with some more Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains reviews.